My name is Jeff Leeper. I'm the City Councilor for Kitchissippi Ward, and we're doing a open house this evening to take a look at the development that has been proposed for 861 Clyde. So this is the former dairy plant. I know people have had a lot of questions about that over the years. It does represent a very significant opportunity to add height and density into the ward, but obviously people are going to have concerns with any number of aspects of it. This is the open house, so this is your opportunity to ask questions about the proposal, find out more from the development team about the details of it. The work of providing feedback is generally by email afterwards. Obviously happy to hear feedback this evening, but it is just the very beginning of the conversation, and I do like to use these as an opportunity to, as much as possible, find out more about the proposal rather than debate the proposal at this early stage. I am really pleased this evening to be joined by Councillor Brockington with River Ward. River is just across the Queensway, obviously, so a really strong interest in the part of that community to find out what this development is. And I'm also really pleased, as always, to be joined by Fiona Mitchell. I haven't looked at the participants list, but I'm guessing that many of you know Fiona, who works on my planning files in the office from the multitude of planning open houses that we have. Also with us this evening is Steve Gauthier. Steve is I'm presuming at this point, the lead planner on the file. We'll talk a bit about what his role will be over the next several months. At the end of the presentation, he can describe to you what he needs to do from here. And at these open houses, he's not here necessarily to debate the proposal, but he's here to listen to the feedback and provide answers with respect to any process questions. So what I'm going to do is ask Vincent. I'm going to ask Fiona just to give us an overview of how the evening will go, and then she can turn it over to Vincent.
Perfect. Thanks, Jeff. And thanks everyone for joining us here tonight. So for those of you who haven't done a development open house webinar with us before, I just want to go through some housekeeping. So you will have noticed already that you are muted and you're not on video. So it's slightly different than a normal Zoom meeting. Very shortly, as Jeff mentioned, Claire is just going to go through a high-level presentation, and then we're going to move into a Q&A. So if you're on a laptop, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A button, and you can type in your questions there. We have one right now that I'm going to show as an example. So someone asked, am I automatically muted? Once I click that button, you should see the question pop up. I'm also going to read the questions out loud, and then one of the panelists is going to answer them. And then when they're done, I'm going to click done, and they go into the answers section. So you can use the Q&A to ask us a question, but you can also use the Q&A to communicate with me. I'm monitoring it throughout. So if something happens with the Zoom platform or whatever, if you have a general question about tonight, I will see it. As well, sorry. Okay, so as well, we are recording this and it'll go onto our ward's YouTube page afterwards. So if you want the link, it'll be up in the next week or two, or you can shoot me an email and I can send you the link in case like a neighbor or something wants to see how this went. As Jeff mentioned, this is the first stab at this, and it's a long process. So after this meeting, what you're going to want to do is submit formal comments to our office as well as to Steve Gauthier, who is here tonight. I'll throw his email address in the chat very shortly. Sorry, that reminds me. I can send you messages in the chat, you just can't respond back. So we may throw out some links and things like that throughout the conversation. And then if you need to respond to them, you can use the Q&A. I think that's all I have to say. Usually I would do like a very quick summary. It's such a dense and I think early stages of development. There's not a lot of granular detail. It's 6 buildings, and I'm going to let Claridge go into those details with more detail. Okay, thanks. I'll turn it over to you, Vincent.
Thanks, Fiona. Vincent Deneme with the applicant, Claridge Homes. So we've prepared a quick presentation, just kind of an overview of the project. I think Tim or Barton will be doing the presentation on behalf of Claridge. They work for Urban Strategies. They're a planning consultant on this project. So
Do you folks want to introduce your team?
Sure. Oh yeah, Vincent with Claridge Homes.
Hi, I'm Tim Smith, a principal and planner with Urban Strategies.
I'm Barton Lung, planner with Urban Strategies.
Nathan Godlovich, architect with Evoke Architecture.
I'm Brad Beivelds. I'm a transportation engineer and I work for Novatech Engineering.
Okay, I think with that, I'll pick it up from there. So good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. I see there's about 52 participants, which is actually, in my mind, a great turnout for a meeting like this. And we're talking about a site that's a little bit out of the way from where most people are living in Ottawa. So it's good that actually people are kind of interested to see what's being proposed for this little pocket of the city, which to us from a planning perspective is really quite interesting. It's a part of the city where we see quite a bit of change occurring over the coming decades. And we think this project is going to be the first of many, and it's certainly, to our mind, quite a bold plan for what we think is a pretty exciting, clearly a high-rise neighborhood. And we're going to kind of explain it to you in some detail. But I just want to spend a little bit of time kind of setting the context for a more detailed description by Nathan, the project architect. So next slide, Barton. Here it comes. Just agenda, and we need to correct this a little bit. We've already sort of done the introductions and welcoming remarks from the councillor. So we're going to spend, I think, about 25 minutes just taking you through the project. And then we're going to have, in fact, not just 25 minutes, but up to maybe an hour if you've got that many questions for us. We're booked for a full hour and a half tonight. So we'll certainly stick around for at least that amount of time if there are that many questions and comments. So let us keep going with the presentation. Now, for those of you who may not know where the site is exactly, this map gives you a pretty good idea. So it's there highlighted in red there, located right between Clyde and Churchill Avenues, right up against Highway 417, just a little bit south, just about 100 meters or so south of Carling Avenue. And we can see we've highlighted there in white some significant areas. Carlingview Park just to the south of our site. Of course, the experimental farm is not too far away. We have the two hospitals a little further, short little trip along Carling Avenue to the east. And you can see we've highlighted the Confederation line, the kind of future extension of the Confederation line to the north, and the dash line there, the Trillium line to the east. So we're actually, not walking distance to these things, but we're actually quite close to those major investments in public transit. You see in the very upper right-hand corner there, just the kind of corner of downtown to give you a sense of the proximity to everything that's in the core of the city. So lots going on in the immediate area. Let's go to the next slide, Barton. Now, zooming in to look even closer at the site. So as Councillor Lepper mentioned, it is the former Nielsen milk processing plant. I would think it was subsequently taken over by Saputo, was it? And it's been closed now for a few years, since 2017, so it's just been sitting there since then. It's right behind the Canadian Tire store on Carling Avenue. If you know it, there's a Boston Pizza next door to the Canadian Tire and a couple of car dealerships next door as well, just to the north. And you can see the site stretches right from Carling Avenue to Churchill Avenue. Its frontage its address is on Carling, but does have access from both of those roads. And as you can see, it's smack up against Highway 417. It's about 2.74 hectares in size. Now here's some pictures just to give you a sense if you don't know the area that well. So you can see some images there, 1 and 5 of the Canadian Tire store. You have some of the low-rise apartment buildings, kitty corner to the Canadian Tire on the north side of Carling. You see the kind of shiny office building just to east of us. So my understanding this is the former Corel headquarters, but now it's almost fully occupied office building, which is good to see. There's some other office buildings a little further to the east. And you see some views of the car dealership there in picture number 6. And then the view number 7 is looking down Churchill towards the site. So the site is kind of at the bottom of that image. And then if you look at picture number 4, you're looking down Clyde Street towards the site. And then picture number 9 is actually looking at the factory building that's on the site today from the highway. Now here's back to an aerial view of the area. We've highlighted with some colors here to give you a sense of the land use context. So we are sitting in a little commercial pocket of the city. On the south side, we have a mix of commercial and some more light industrial uses. On the north side of 417, we've got a whole mix of things going on. It's obviously the Canadian Tire and the office building I mentioned, a number of other car-oriented commercial uses, particularly on the west side of Clyde Avenue. And these are uses that certainly are functioning businesses today that likely over time, with the ongoing growth of the city and the growth, a lot of that growth tended to happen through intensification. And Carling Avenue being such an important transit corridor in the city, we certainly see the area, our site and the area around it evolving and intensifying with redevelopment over time to become really an interesting, more transit-focused neighborhood within the sort of area that's really very well-established low-rise communities. And you can see with the orange lines here, we're really well located in terms of the city's transit network. Carling Avenue at one time, and in fact, to our mind, will one day be a rapid transit line, an LRT, or at least a BRT. That's not currently a funded plan. However, it is a priority transit corridor where there will be improvements made, dedicated bus lanes, signal upgrades to make the transit work even better. And you can see in the bottom left-hand corner how frequent the transit service is to the area. So it really makes the site well connected to the rest of the city in terms of transit. We do expect that the people living in this future development that we're planning will, while they might own a car to use on the weekend and such, but for their day-to-day trips, we expect a significant majority of the people relying on transit to get around. Let's go to the next slide, Barton. So just quickly, in terms of context, so everyone understands what the official plan sort of says about our site today. We are in the city's general urban area, which covers a huge part of the city, all of its neighborhoods. And it is an area where, sure, there's a lot of established neighborhoods where there might not be a lot of change, but it is a part of the city that where the intensification is expected to happen. But there does need to be a greater respect for existing neighborhood fabric. So what we call kind of context appropriate intensification. A range of uses are permitted, low, medium, high density housing. Intensification, as I mentioned, is supported. Now within the general urban area, there's a general height limit, unless you're really close to a rapid transit station or right against one of those higher order transit, priority transit corridors. You are capped at 9 stories, and the arterial Main Street zoning on the site today, which I should highlight because that's a zoning that actually does permit a range of uses and does anticipate intensification of the site. It also has a height limit of around 9 stories as well. And this is understandable when you think about a general urban site that's surrounded by low-rise neighborhoods. We want to make sure there's an appropriate transition to that low-rise neighborhood. The unique thing about our site here is that, in fact, it's not right up against low-rise neighborhoods. It's, as we pointed out, inside a kind of commercial node where taller buildings, in our mind, are not going to have any kind of adverse impact on surrounding neighborhoods. And in fact, the intensification that we're proposing on the site is going to create really a self-contained neighborhood that's going to set the stage for broader renewal on the surrounding lands, which will, over time, support even better transit on Carling Avenue and even a better transit network overall, as well as bringing a number of kind of amenities that are going to benefit the larger area. So with that bit of setup on the policy side, I think let's move into describing for you our proposed master plan. This is a pretty significant development, one that will really build out over phases, and Nathan will describe those phases to you over many years. It is as you can see here, it's a 6-tower development, and with additional mid-rise buildings. You might think it's all apartment buildings, but in fact, as Nathan will describe for you, it also includes some town housing development, and very importantly, includes what to us are like significant open space improvements in the neighborhood. A new neighborhood park right on Clyde Avenue to give the development an address and to provide an amenity and a kind of a gathering point for what we see as becoming a larger neighborhood over time. And as well, a linear open space up against the 417. We are required to set back our development from the 417 by 14 meters. So we thought a great opportunity to use that as a usable open space to kind of provide a trail connection through there. It could be publicly accessible. And as well, and Nathan will take you through this in more detail, we do have some interesting really amenity spaces for the people that will be living in this community. So with that little overview, I'm going to turn it over to Nathan to go into a bit more detail about the project.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, this is the first I've spoken tonight, so can everyone hear me? Can someone just say yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. First off, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight for the open house. And we're pleased to present this project. We've had a very interesting time in this development. Clare H. Holmes was kind enough to ask Evoke Architecture to look at a master plan, a development plan, and an architectural concept for how to deal with this extremely interesting and challenging site. It's a site with a lot of very particular characteristics that Tim described, and a lot of challenges that we had to deal with in order to what we hope was create an idea that would create a pocket neighborhood in the middle of this sort of industrial and commercial area, one that would eventually blend with the adjacent neighborhoods to the north. And also because of its position on the 417, create kind of a gateway project that would give a perception of what's happening in Ottawa as one approaches downtown, or as one is leaving downtown heading towards the west. As Tim mentioned, it's a 6-tower project, but the towers themselves were part of a larger concept that allowed us to develop something that we feel created an environment that would be diverse and interesting to live in itself, and create perhaps a starting point for a contemporary, denser neighborhood that would develop to the area south of Carling Street. Some of the other things that we had to really deal with on this site, aside from the 417, which of course is very important in terms of how to deal with noise, sound, visual unpleasantness to many. We also had to deal with kind of a very long, skinny site, basically, with very little street frontage, effectively, only a small amount on each of Churchill and Clyde. The site has an irregular shape that makes it a little bit of a challenge to fit a development in with open land. And again, the relationship with the existing neighborhoods to the north. The site is pretty much isolated from the neighborhoods to the south by the highway. What we decided to do in looking at how to develop this project was to push the density as much as possible towards the highway. Architecturally, we could manage acoustically apartment towers that were facing the highway by presenting their narrow front to them and using more massive materials where it was facing the highway, limiting windows. But in doing so, we also allowed for the project to develop a kind of the idea of being a barrier. that kind of conceals the highway itself, but it also creates a new front for the people to the south, to the north rather, in terms of what they would see. And then it allows us to reduce the density as we head towards the north to create a sort of a transitional density from south to north, leading to the 1- and 2-story neighborhoods that exist north of Carling. There are several unifying elements that pull this whole project together. The first is, of course, the neighborhood park, which we positioned at the northwest corner of the site. You can see here. The location was strategic. It's easily accessed by all the residents of the neighborhood of the future, this project and the new neighborhoods. It will allow perhaps for the park to expand to the north if there are further developments to the north. The location of the park allows the park itself, which is dedicated to the city, it's a public park land, it's not private, to offer a stage around which the entire project is sort of developed and experienced. It again becomes sort of a main pedestrian access point to the project. It becomes a focus of public open space on the site, and it generates the orientation and the form of the buildings that surround it. So we've tried to use this park and the surrounding buildings to create a bit of a civic space that becomes basically the main gateway to this project. The second unifying element that ties the project from east to west is what I refer to on this drawing as the promenade, which is the internal street that provides the access point to all of the buildings. And at the same time, it offers a natural connectivity with future developments. As we saw in Tim's diagram, the way the promenade is placed, it will provide good future access to future projects from the center of this very long block. It offers movement and access spine for the entire project. It offers, no, let's not go there just yet. Okay, well, we can. It offers diverse experiences. It offers grade level amenities and commercial spaces off it. We're going to see in future slides that the residential entrances, including townhomes and tower lobbies, will be there. We see it as a tree-lined 6-meter wide roadway. The Clyde entrance offers civic formality. The central section offers a residential street. And at the far end towards Churchill, a portal, which is the western gateway to the project. The other continuous element, can we just go back one moment, please? Thank you, is what we refer to as the South Podium, which is that curvy 6-story building that lines the south edge below the towers. It will all have the same treatment. It has a wavy form. It's facing what we refer to as the green buffer, which is the green strip between the highway and our project. It offers a kind of a unifying vocabulary that knits the project together. It offers a sound and wind visual barrier to the northern part of the site. Its wavy form is intended to diffuse sound, and it offers a visual dynamic form when it's approached by motorists. So it's important visually from the highway perception of this project. The roofs of this space will be occupied as amenity space and will be landscaped. Okay, we can go on to the next one again. This is a diagram that just shows basically the networks of how this project was sort of put together. The mobility indicates the main circulation, which will be shared, vehicular, pedestrian, and bicycle. You can see it's accessed from both Clyde and Churchill. and offers an access through, and then it loops the park at the Clyde side of the project and becomes an important sort of boulevard, if you wish, through what's you'll see is the main sort of civic gesture of the project, which is that open space at the corner. The access to interior parking structure, which is 3 stories below grade, and the first 2 stories facing the highway above grade, are from secondary spur roads, which we'll refer to as avenues, which divide the project into 3 blocks. So those are, you see the orange lines that penetrate in between the towers. That's where most people will access their parking, so there won't be cars coming in and off directly off that main road, which is a shared road. The open space network, the central diagram, shows number 1, the neighborhood park. Number 2, in the 14-meter band facing the highway, we're proposing that this will be heavily landscaped, very green. The lower 2 floors will be walls of the parking structure, and we see those as being ivy covered. So, and that this space will be a recreation area with exercise spaces, all sorts of amenities, and a bike path. And we see this as being part of a recreational network that will continue from east and west. The proposed maximum building heights diagram on the right shows what we are proposing in terms of building height. Just to summarize, we are proposing 30-story elliptical towers, 2 on the Churchill side, 2 on the Clyde side, 1 on the Churchill side, which will be sort of the pinnacles, iconic structures that indicate the east and west sides of the project. 3 towers that are more or less identical in the center at 25 floors, equally spaced. The podium structures at 6 floors, and then the mid-rise on the northern side of the project, ranging from 4 for the lowest part of it to 9 for the central trapezoidal form that you see there. This central block and the block facing Churchill are built on 2-story podiums that have parking, as I mentioned, towards the highway. Amenities on the other side, and the roof of that space we refer to as a suspended garden, and that is going to be an open amenity space that is accessible to the public as well. There is going to be a pedestrian way of traveling right through the middle of this project, going through the park, going up onto that podium, and then walking through, crossing bridges, and coming down on the other side. So again, this is part of the sort of wealth of movement and spatial diversity that we're trying to create. Next slide, please. We're looking at an aerial view, so I'm going to go into some of the description, but we can see a little bit more clearly here because of the sort of dark rendering of the roadway, where we have green, where we have garden. And you can see that the project, we've divided into 3 zones. Each of them is rather distinctive. The first 2 towers facing the park on the Clyde side is 1 block, and then that there's a central block that is sort of on axis with the park that includes the 2 25-story towers and the mid-rise right in the center of the project. And then the 2 towers on the east side of the project, the 25 in the middle and the 30 at the end, sitting right over that promenade, which forms the eastern gateway to the project, straddling 2 podium buildings at 6 stories. And you can see the kind of quality we're trying to get for the suspended garden in the middle of the central block in between the 2 high-rises and the mid-rise, and we'll see some views of that space coming up. Next slide, please. Here we see an aerial of the overall impression of the project as seen, well, from the air, looking slightly from I guess, from the south, sorry, a little confused, southeast. And we can see the 6 towers, and as well the green band separating the highway from the project, and the 6-story podium, which is the green wall of kind of copper-colored wangly wall that sort of ties the project together with gaps in between the phases. Next slide, please. Okay, we're looking at the project now from the northwest. So we can see the park in the center, and we can see, I'm going to start going into descriptions of the different blocks. So there are 3 separate blocks, as I mentioned before. The first block, the Clyde block, is the 2 30-story towers. We can see that the towers here are oriented with their axes on the rays of the circle that's defined by the park. So they really address the park. And at their foot and in between them is an area that we'll refer to as a plaza. The lower floors will have amenities, perhaps some retail. There's an intention that those lower floors be open and transparent. The 6-story podium we can see is closing that view of the highway from the park, so it creates sort of a bit of a separate world. And then the building has a face on Clyde itself, where the podium sort of pokes through under the tower and presents an elevation to Clyde. That's where we see there being some retail activity and also the built face of the project. But the formal face of the project is really from the park, looking at the 2 towers, which are presenting their very slender faces towards the tower and creating what we feel is an interplay between the architecture and the green spaces. We'll go into the central block next. I just say that you can see the way the mid-rise addresses the park just in the front. There are 3 buildings in the central block, and that mid-rise that is on the north side of the park presents a face that we see as either being a mural or projection or some public face. And you also see a little glimpse of the agora, which is sort of a set of bleachers and open stairs that leads up to this 2nd-story podium. Next slide, please. So this is a view from the park. So we can see how the buildings create a barrier that the highway is gone as far as seeing it and hopefully hearing it is concerned from this area. So we've created a new environment, and you can start seeing how we have created a very dense row of towers, and then begin stepping down with buildings at different angles and different forms to create a bit of a diverse kind of midtown feel, very urban midtown feel to this area. Next slide, please. We're looking from the park up to the mid-rise part of the middle block. So here we can see where we've introduced the bleachers. So a public space, it faces the park, it faces west. And then if you go up those stairs, you're on the 2nd floor podium, where you can walk in between the buildings, which are designed to have a very diverse form, different shape, different materials. So again, to feel that you're in a bit of a dynamic space. That large glass area that you see below the face of the 6-story structure will be neighborhood amenities that will be used by everyone in the entire project. And you get to see the sort of civic feel of the edge of the park, the sidewalk, and the promenade, which curves around the park, being separated by from the mid-rise block and the public spaces that are on the other side of the street. So again, trying to create sort of a diverse, rich neighborhood with a lot of variety of space. Next slide, please. You were looking at the promenade, looking back towards Clyde Street, and this is where it becomes more of a residential street. We're introducing 2 levels of townhouses at this level along the street. So there will be individual residential entrances at grade with small private terraces. And then on the upper levels, that's on the 3rd and 4th floors, there's another series of 2-story units that will be accessed from a corridor that faces the 2nd-story podium that we discussed earlier. So they will actually have views both to the front and the back. Next slide, please. This is an image from that suspended garden on the 2nd floor. Buildings, individual amenities, swimming pools, for instance, recreational gyms, facilities, make spaces, creative spaces will open onto it. So there won't be private units that are facing this space because we would like it to be a semi-public. And here we feel again that between the tall buildings that are to the right and the smaller mid-rises to the left, that we're creating an atmosphere that is intimate but somewhat civic, and a place that people might discover and just go for a stroll that is completely sort of separate from the surrounding environment, offering something different and interesting. Next slide, please. Lastly, the final block that we're going to discuss is the Churchill Block, and here we can see the main tower of the Churchill Block, which sits on 2 podium structures and straddles them. And this creates a portal that is the end of the promenade, and that is the eastern gateway to the project. So if you are coming from Churchill, this would be the main access to the project from the other side. In future, perhaps future developments can pick up on this axis that's been created. So in this view, you can see how there are glass bridges that connect the 2 parts of the podium underneath the tower to create this volume of open space. And you can see the roofs of the townhomes on the south side will be extensions of the suspended garden in the central block. And the whole network on the 2nd level are connected by bridges and stairways at both ends. So if you find your way up there, you can meander through and then find your way back down again. So again, it offers a sort of a multi-level urban experience. Next slide, please. Just to summarize quickly, we can see the different blocks and the phases of development. Of course, the central block, because it has all the amenities in it, we see that as being the first area that will be developed along with the park. And an access to it. Obviously, we'll need an access to the project. Second phase would be the Churchill Block, and the 3rd phase would be the 2 large towers facing the park on the Clyde side. Next slide, please. Oops. Well, let's go back to the last the slide before, because I'm just going to say that just to summarize very quickly the synthesis of what we attempt to do in the project. Number one, because of the highway, was to mitigate sound and the impact of the highway, to create an iconic architectural image as seen from the 417, to create a softer image towards the north, to create a strong east-west architectural and circulation elements tying this entire project together from Churchill to Clyde, to encourage leisurely and enjoyable movement everywhere through the project at multiple levels, to densify, and to densify with a concentration towards the south of the site in order to create a transition towards the north, and one that is towards a more neighborhood scaled architecture on the north side of the project, to create a variety of spatial, architectural, and movement qualities, to create distinct street experiences, to offer different housing typologies, and to provide all this and use the building and open space to create spaces of civic quality. So I will go on to the next slide now and pass the microphone back to Tim.
Thanks, Nathan. I'm just going to wrap up this last slide. Just highlights what we see as sort of the key benefits of the proposed development. As I mentioned earlier, this level of intensification is certainly going to help support ongoing transit improvements, particularly along Carling Avenue. Ultimately support, I think, the in time goal of getting rapid transit on Carling Avenue. Certainly going to add new types of housing to the community, certainly a number of apartments, but also townhousing. And within that mix of housing will be units of a great variety of sizes, bachelor apartments to 3-bedroom units. So there certainly would be a conscious effort to make sure there's a good, adequate proportion of housing here that's appropriate for families. But we also recognize there'll be a need to include a significant amount of affordable housing, and that proportion and what that looks like will be worked out with the city as we go through the review period. We're adding, as I think was made very clear in Nathan's description, a not insignificant amount of green space to the area, both in the form of the neighborhood park and the landscape open space along the south edge of the site. And with that open space at the south edge, as well as the promenade street that runs through the site, there's 2 opportunities there for pedestrians and cyclists to kind of cut across this block between Churchill and Clyde, which we think will help with connectivity, particularly from the cycle tracks along Churchill across the site down to Carling View Park and the trail that winds through the experimental farm. And we are going to be, as I said earlier, really, I think, setting the stage for broader renewal in this area and reinvestment that we think will be just overall positive for the immediate area and for the city as a whole. And big picture, we really are being very consistent with the city's overall goals around how to manage growth in the city. This, to us, is very consistent with the vision for intensification of underutilized lands to make sure you've got that balance of inward and outward growth, and ultimately are building a sustainable city, sustainable in terms of the environment and socially, as well as economically. So with that, we're wrapped up with our presentation. Thanks for listening. I think it was a little bit more than 25 minutes, but we still have lots of time for questions. And I see, looks like we're up to about 18 or so questions. So I guess it's back to you, Fiona, to run us through those.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So as was just mentioned, we do have 18 questions in the queue right now. Feel free to keep submitting them. As I go through them, I'm going to be cognizant about not reading the same question over and over again as much as possible. So if you've submitted a similar comment to somebody else, whichever comment I get to first is the one that will be read out. I'm also going to try and pay attention to who's submitting the comment. So if you've maybe submitted 3 in a row, I might just grab one, go through everyone else, and then come back to your questions. Also, some of there's some comments and stuff on, I think, the presentation from earlier. So we'll try to figure out what you were getting at as best as possible. But if we've missed it for some reason, just go back in the Q&A and let us know. So on that note, I think in one of the first slides, somebody was asking which way is north of the Ottawa River. Maybe we can go back to one of the first slides and point out where north is.
Actually, you can see in this image here, looking to the northwest, the Ottawa River in the background there.
Okay.
Barton, do you want to go back to the very first kind of location map? Oh, there we go. Okay. So there you can see the water there to the north is the Ottawa River.
Okay, thank you.
North is not quite straight up here, but pretty close to straight up here.
Perfect. A comment, I think, more than anything, not a lot of greenery question mark. Carlington Woods is within a 10-minute walk. So I think that was in response to something someone said in the presentation. So I'm sure they've noted that.
Yes, we do acknowledge that. Yeah, sorry, I guess we weren't speaking about the immediate surroundings. We talked about the lack of greenery on the north side of the 417. We certainly acknowledge there's a richness of green space to the south of us, which actually is certainly going to be an asset for this area as it evolves over time.
Okay, thank you. Is it possible to share the presentation with us? So we're recording this and we're going to throw this on YouTube, but can you folks share this presentation with us and we can email it to people, or?
Absolutely, yeah. We'll get you a PDF of this right after the meeting.
Perfect, thank you. And I assume a lot of this will be on the DevOps site at some point as well. Okay, what is the expected impact on local residents like traffic, property taxes, real estate values, parking?
Well, that's a big question. Lots in it, and I'm not sure we can give full answers to all components of it. Just on traffic, we do have Brad here from Novatech. The traffic impact assessment is still underway. It's a sort of staged approach we take to that, working with city staff to make sure all our assumptions, we're all on the same page in terms of assumptions and background information that feeds into that. So that will be forthcoming fairly soon, I think in the next couple of weeks or so. So we'll have a bit more detailed information there. So I'll just make one observation around traffic impacts of this, even though we can't give you specifics at the moment, and Brad can certainly correct me or add to this if he has something to add. But this, as we pointed out, this is a commercial pocket of the city today. So you certainly have traffic generated by the Canadian Tire, for example, the office buildings to the east. And so those are destinations that are bringing kind of traffic into the area. For the most part, our development would be creating traffic that's kind of going out. So it's sort of going in the opposite direction. So to the extent that there might be some congestion in the area today, and I don't think there's a great deal of it, really we're not going to be adding to that, at least in the same direction that much of that traffic is headed in. So we're not anticipating the impacts are going to be significant. We also have signalized intersections both at Churchill and Clyde along Carling. So those controlled access points ensure that the traffic to and from the site can be fairly well managed. Brad, I'm not sure if you want to add anything else beyond those comments.
Yeah, like I guess where we are, we're working through the city's traffic impact assessment process. We're currently at step 3, awaiting sign off on our traffic forecasting prior to finalizing the final TIA for submission. We're hoping to have something in next week. And once we submit it, it'll be available on the city's development application website for review and comment. Yeah.
Just on the other aspects of that question, I mean, again, we couldn't give you any specific information in terms of what the impacts would be on property values or property taxes. I can only make the general comment that a development like this, generally, in just about any kind of context like this, is only going to have a positive impact on land values and the area, and therefore, both on a personal basis, property values generally go up, and property taxes course, is not simply based on the uplift in property values, but the impact of a development like this can only be positive.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Will the park be functional in terms of stormwater control?
That's a very good question. What we can tell you now is that in part, but if the thought is it going to be used to actually capture and retain stormwater from the development? Generally not. It will be, of course, a soft landscape. It will be impervious, so it will actually, there'll be greater infiltration of stormwater just because we're creating a park where today there's only pavement. So it does have some role in that respect to managing stormwater management. But generally, most of the stormwater from the development will be captured in detention tanks in the below grade parking structure, and then incrementally the flows from those storage tanks will flow into the city's stormwater management system. So
Tim, if I may, it's an excellent question. I know the city has been taking tentative steps into, trying to improve green spaces with things like bioswales and trying to be fairly progressive on that. If this proposal moves through, the park that is proposed I believe is proposed to be a parkland dedication.
that's correct.
So the city will have a significant role to play in designing that park, and I think that it creates a really interesting opportunity to try to push the envelope on some of the progressive stormwater management discussions that the city's been having for a few years now.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree, Councillor. I guess my only comment would be that at the same time we'll want that park to ensure that it can be functional throughout the year. And so yes, absolutely. I think it would be an interesting idea to look at bioswales and things like that as part of the landscaping treatment of that park. I'm not a stormwater management engineer, so I can't speak with authority on this, but I suspect that could be, yeah, we could add that as part of the solution. At the same time, I'm sure we'll also need to maintain some cisterns on the site. But the idea, by the way, one thing I didn't mention, I think Nathan might have touched on this, is that we are looking at green roofs on the kind of 6-story elements of the project. So there will be an opportunity there to capture some stormwater.
I should just add as well that we have it in other projects used the stormwater that is captured in cisterns, to use that stormwater for all the irrigation for the on-site greenery as well. So the water is captured and reused. All of it doesn't go back into directly into the storm system. A lot of it is used for irrigation.
Thank you, Nathan. I forgot that point. Yeah, very important point.
It's a great question. And is Steve still online?
Yep.
I know he was having some connectivity issues. Oh, there he is. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Steve, that's I have a particular interest in that as we move forward.
Noted.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Can Nathan elaborate on what he means by saying the development is isolated from the community to the south? There is a large green space area that would be a large focus for recreation.
Well, by isolated, I simply meant physically. Inner city highways have a destructive effect on cities. I think that's something that's sort of been discussed and known by planners and architects since the 1960s. This highway is no exception. The fact that Churchill is a dead end is because of the highway, and that particularly now that the highway is being built on major embankments rather than being completely open, means that the passages underneath it they're tunnels. So what I meant quite simply is that it's a physical obstacle that obstructs the free movement of people and vehicles north and south. And because the site is where it is, for the width of the site, has no meaningful grade level view to the neighborhood to the south. And the only way to kind of get there is underneath the highway, which some people would find rather unpleasant. So the more natural relationship would be towards the north, where the obstacle isn't there and there's no visual barricade that's blocking it. So what I meant simply, I think, is that the normal effect that we see of what highways do in terms of creating walls through the middle of cities. And there's not very much that can be done about that in terms of mitigating it. So we've tried to work with it in this case.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps more a question for Jeff. Do we yet know what will become of the Canadian Tire property, which, as far as I understand, will close following the open of the new Canadian Tire at Carlingwood? To me, what we're looking for here will be helped or hindered significantly by whatever may be planned for that property to the north.
The property is not in Claridge's hands. It is still in different private hands, and we do not know what the future of it is. There's been no development application that has crossed my desk. Yeah, I don't know what to say beyond that. The applicant, we can't hold this application up pending an application on the other parcels. So presumably the designers have designed on the assumption that there is going to be something there that is a constraint on what they can do, and I'd be curious to hear from them in terms of what those constraints are.
What I can say, Councillor, is we have given some thought about the lands to the north. Our understanding is, and our expectation is that they'll continue to be used, the Canadian Tire site in particular, will continue to be used for commercial uses for the foreseeable future. And whether that's 10, 15, 20 years, it's a bit hard to say, but I think our understanding is that it will continue to be a leased site. So it's hard for us to predict when change will happen there. However, we are anticipating, and this is going to be something that folks can have a look at once we've made our application, is we are anticipating that over time there will be residential intensification on those sites, and our hope is that it can be planned and designed so that, in fact, the green park, the neighborhood park that we've are planning on our site can actually become part of a chain of open spaces that goes right across the block. Our development will face that sort of green corridor, if you will, and we're hopeful that development on the other side will face it as well. And similar to what we're showing on the north edge of our site, that would be low and mid-rise forms of development, so not tall towers, that the density would then step back up as you got towards Carling Avenue. Again, this is something we'll kind of talk through with planning and urban design staff to get their notions of how they see the large area change, but this is what we're anticipating to be the case.
Thank you. Are these condos or rentals?
I think, and Vince, you can jump in here, I think that it's not been determined yet, but there's an expectation, I believe, of be a mix of condo and rental, but the details of that haven't worked out. Vincent, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, like we haven't kind of figured that one out yet, but I would expect it to be a mix of both for sure.
Okay, thank you. Who exactly is the barrier from the highway serving? The residents who live across Carling Ave from the Canadian Tire store?
Oh, I think what you're referring to is when Nathan talked about the towers actually creating kind of a barrier, if you will, and a buffer against the 417. So yes, that would really be to all, both existing and future residents and businesses, quite frankly, that are to the north of our site. So effectively creating a kind of buffer there so that there's going to be some mitigation of noise, and certainly the view will change for anyone who's kind of to the north of our site. That's what was meant.
Okay, thank you. If there's about 1,600 cars anticipated at max capacity, what kind of impact would there be on local traffic patterns? Or is this coming up later in the presentation?
Well, I think we touched a little bit on this related to the previous question, that we don't have details yet in terms of what the precise impacts will be. So I'll just, I think, revert to the general comment there that, first of all, although, yes, there might be 1,600 cars parked on the site, that we're not expecting all of those cars to be used on a daily basis. In fact, I venture to say that at least half, if not 2/3 or more of those cars will not be used on a daily basis, because I don't think there'll be a need to, given the proximity of the transit. So again, we're optimistic that the traffic impacts are acceptable. Yes, are we going to be adding to the traffic of the area? Of course, there'll be a marginal increase in traffic. And I just asked that questioner to stay tuned. And once our transportation impact assessment has been posted on the DevApp site, they can get a clearer picture of that, and certainly follow up with us, or I guess through Steve or the counselor's office to get a more direct answer when we have it available.
Would it be safe to assume that with this, like, this is a discussion, obviously, I want to continue having with the developer. It's a lot of spots. Would it be safe to assume, though, that with the proposed number of spots, if transit is not fairly drastically improved along Carling Avenue, which it will be eventually, this would probably generate 400 or 500 trips per hour at peak?
Brad, do you want to try to respond to that?
I guess based on our forecasting report that we submitted to the city, we're estimating the traffic generation to be in the era of 400 to 500 vehicle trips at full occupancy of the full phase, 3 phases.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Of course, at the end of the 3 phases. So, so I mean, it speaks to the need to my mind. I think that's a fairly significant traffic generator, which is either reduce the number of cars that are being parked there, or we need to drastically improve the transit on Carling.
Yeah, fair comment. I'll just add that there will be developing a travel demand management plan as required by the city, and certainly will identify a number of measures that will try to continue to reduce car usage through a variety of measures. And this will be a phased development over many years, and I think hopefully the improvements will come that can reduce the demand for the parking. We're just making cautious assumptions at this stage.
Okay, thank you. So there's several questions about affordable housing. So I'd like to do as many of them as possible in a lump sum. So first one, is there any affordable housing? And then on a similar unit, is any thought being given to low cost rental units? And I think that's it. So yes.
Vincent, you want to go with this first?
Sure, yeah. I mean, we're always working with CMHC and various programs that are available to us to promote affordable housing. Like we've said, this is a 10, 20-year project, so we're not sure what affordability is going to look like in the next few years as the city evolves their inclusionary zoning or their affordable programs. So it's really too early to tell what we can commit to, but we're definitely looking into it right now.
I think I would just add, if it wasn't made clear at this point yet, is that we're submitting applications for an official plan amendment and rezoning. What will follow, though, are site plan applications for each phase of development. And so the questions like affordable housing and even traffic impacts will be looked at sort of in greater detail with site plan application. And of course, the details of each phase may change based on how things change, certainly around affordable housing, what kind of programs become available over the next number of years. Also, how city policies may evolve over time too.
I'll just say beyond the mitigating effect or disciplining effect on rental prices of having a large amount of inventory come into the market, which is important to address market affordability. The developer knows that affordable housing is a priority for me on this one. And I suspect, given the density and scale of this development, that council is going to want to see a significant contribution toward affordable housing as well. This isn't a single tower being built somewhere. This is like a very large, significant project. And I think before council is able to vote and support this one, they're going to want to see affordable housing as well.
Thank you. Okay, and on a similar note, what is the expected demographic profile of the residents? Families, elderly, singles?
I mean, all of the above, I'm going to assume. Like we said, this is a very large project, so I mean, the demographics are going to evolve over the 10, 20 years that we built this. So, yeah, Tim, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think not really. It is a mix, right? I think we're really not, no development of this scale can really just target one demographic. And we can look at the demographics today. If buildings were going to go up in the next few years, it might not happen quite that quickly, but you would be targeting millennials and young families with one or two small children, perhaps, but also baby boomers that are downsizing, as well as singles looking to be maybe not right downtown, but close to downtown, more in the heart of the city than other locations. But the demographics will change over time. And so the idea, I think, with a development like this is you want sort of flexibility so that you're always meeting the demand for whichever demographic group is strongest in the market. So there'll be a mix of a good healthy mix of units of all sizes. And of course, we've already talked about ranges of affordability as well.
Okay, thank you. Going through, okay. What decision/consultation process did your team go through to determine the height of the proposed structures? You insist that the height of these towers will have no adverse effects, but have you taken into account the fact that these towers will completely ruin one of the most scenic views in the city, the hill and bike trails at Carlington Park, which also happens to be one of the biggest draws to the Carlington community? The elevation of the hill is 100 meters. The elevation of the Claridge site is 77 meters. Anything over 7 stories will destroy the beauty of this neighborhood landmark. Please keep it to the existing 9-story limit.
Okay, I think that question is mostly a comment. It's one that I think we have to take a look at. The views to Carlington Park. So that's something, since it's now been raised, I'm sure that Steve is here is going to note it, and something that we'll be talking about with city staff to perhaps look at the impacts of views on Carlington Park. I would just make the comment, I think that the 30 stories, and Nathan can speak to this too, is that we did consciously set out to create a landmark development. We think the sort of height and the density that goes with this height is appropriate for this area, given its location in the city, given its proximity to transit and the opportunity to create kind of a unique neighborhood within the broader neighborhood. So we understand when you have 30-story towers, you are going to change views. So the key question is how significantly are you going to change those views? How important are those views to begin with? We understand that folks living in this area might consider this to have a significant impact, but I think we'll have to look at it from really all perspectives to really consider how significant that change is and weigh that against what we consider to be the many benefits of the project at this height. Nathan, I'm not sure if you have anything you want to add.
No, I don't really have much to add except for the fact that we have attempted to maximize as much as we can the space in between the buildings by turning them so that they're wider side is facing each other as opposed to creating a bit more of a built wall. But yes, again, this is something that has to be looked at with full context and understanding from views from the neighborhoods and what this will be changing.
Sorry, I was muted. Okay, this looks pretty funky at first blush, but I want to know what sustainable building standards you plan to use and what renewable energy systems you're considering. How, from the city's point of view, does this development fit within the overall goals and vision of the recently passed energy evolution?
Nathan, do you want to speak to this? Only one comment I can make is that Claire does intend to design this to LEED Silver standards. And that at this point, given that we're kind of at the conceptual planning stage, we haven't worked out the details in terms of how we might rely on renewable energy here. Nathan, I'm not sure if you have anything more, or Vincent have anything more to add.
Well, I could just add that we'll discuss amongst in the development team whether this is an appropriate project to utilize geothermal, which we have used with Claridge in other projects. So there's a potential that's something that certainly can be looked at. There's a great potential for solar on this project because we're south-facing on the highway side, and actually at the lower two levels have extensive walls that won't have fenestration in them where the parking is. So there is a potential, but we're still again at early stages. Certainly, as Tim was mentioning, that we will be building to LEED Silver. All the energy requirements will surpass LEED because current energy regulations necessitate that we'll be doing that, and we will be, as we do on all our projects. Water management, stormwater management is an important aspect on the project, as well as elimination of heat islands. So there are many sustainable measures that have become almost expected approaches to any project that they don't necessarily get big call outs, but they've just become sort of our normal modus operandi on these projects to build at least 2 LEED Silver. This project will be no exception, and again, Claridge has been willing and interested in using alternate energy sources on other projects in the past, and it will certainly be considered in this project as well.
Okay, thank you. What size of neighborhood park? You say this park is strategic as it could expand north. If it expands, that means that you as a developer or you plan to take over the Canadian Tire location.
Well, Nathan mentioned that there was the opportunity to expand the park to the north. That may not happen for the full length of the park, only because the driveway to Canadian Tire is likely to remain there even if the site redevelops, given that there's a traffic signal in that location. But as I mentioned previously, our thought, and this will require some discussion with the city, with city staff, the thinking is that is the beginning of an open space system that kind of transitions across the block towards the east through a series of other open spaces that come forward with each phase of development that happens to the north. Again, the timing of that's sort of highly uncertain, but we certainly had in mind that our park was not the be-all and end-all. It was not the only open space that would serve this larger block, that it would be one of many spaces, and one of those could be that sort of a contiguous part of our future park. The size of our park is just about a third of a hectare, so less than an acre, but it's to us still a good size for a kind of neighborhood park, accommodate a small playground. It is meant to be primarily a passive open space. We certainly have Carlingview Park to the south that, as has been noted, is just a short walk away for those more active recreational pursuits.
Thank you. Will the city proactively improve the public transit in the area? The consultants expect the city will do so reactively in the future.
It's a good question. We have new bus priority measures that will go in over the course of the next couple of years. Generally, the transit frequency only increases as the density requires it. So the city's not going to boost the frequency of transit on Carling until we have the density to support it. But when that density is there, things like frequency will improve. Bus rapid transit beyond the bus priority measures that are coming in the next couple of years, fully exclusive segregated lanes for buses wouldn't go in until there is a density of residents on the street to support it. It's very chicken and egg in terms of public transportation. Density is used to support improved public transit. Right now on Carling Avenue, it's a line on a map. So in the city's transportation master plan indicating where we will be focusing our public transit efforts, Carling is one of the key lines, and it will stay a key line, I'm absolutely certain, in the next iteration of the transportation master plan that will be published in a year and a half or so. But the actual improvements to transit will follow the density. They'll have to improve down Carling. It's not just this development. Keep in mind that everything from the Civic Hospital all the way through to the Webb's Motel, the Travel Lodge, Westgate, Carling is becoming tall and dense, and the city will improve the transit as it needs to in order to support that density.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, sorry. So we have some parking questions, so I'm going to read them both. First one, you are offering a lot of parking spaces, almost one-to-one, which means more traffic congestion in my neighborhood. Could you not get away with fewer spots, such as one spot for every 2 units? And then piggybacking on to that, has your team taken any consideration for visitor parking once the site is complete? There's already a lack of on-street parking in the area, and I'm sure Canadian Tire would not appreciate having non-customers use their lot.
Brett, I'm not sure. I think we've partially answered this question before. I don't know if you want to repeat that or add anything to it.
Well, I guess the parking requirements for an area of or for this area are 0.5 spaces per unit, but also 0.2 spaces per visitor parking spaces per unit. And the quoted parking is a combined tenant and visitor. So I guess the parking demand that's for the client to review the supply and the demand for a development of this nature. Yeah, the development will provide visitor parking in accordance with the zoning bylaw to reduce any spillover parking onto the adjacent streets.
Yeah, I think I would just add that, as I mentioned earlier, it is fair to say that you're providing a lot of parking. That suggests there's going to be a lot of traffic being generated from the site. That is partially true, but at the same time, and Claire can certainly attest to this, is that there's a market demand for housing, which is not necessarily a market demand for parking is not necessarily always correlated with the use of those cars that are parked there. In other words, people want a parking space, but it's not because they need to drive a car every single day. It's because they want a car some of the time. So this is something that Brad will be looking at through his work to really focus on trips that are generated based on not simply the parking supply, but on what we assume that the kind of modal split will be. In other words, given the proximity to good transit here, as I mentioned earlier, we would assume that there will be a high usage of transit. Yes, there'll be cars people driving, but it certainly won't be every car that's parked on the site.
And the parking ratios, anyway, will be discussed throughout the approval process.
Fiona, can I just jump in there?
Yeah.
I don't want to speak for Jeff. This is Riley Brockington speaking, the counselor in River Ward. If Claridge is trying to offer parking to match what the zoning bylaw requires, then Councillor Leeper and I are willing to have a conversation with you on lowering the number of parking spots. But if I think I heard correctly from Mr. Smith, there is market forces that are demanding that parking. But certainly we want to contribute and encourage as much active transportation and public transit use as possible. And certainly in the southern end of River Ward, we see large legacy apartment buildings with seas of empty parking because people don't have a car. They're certainly not to the same ratio that when these apartments were built. So I don't know what your more recent experience is with parking demand, but if you know you're not going to need 1,650 parking spots, I'm sure the local council and I would be willing to talk to you about how we can go towards less than 1,650. So I just wanted to make sure you're aware of our intent or our support for less spots.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll certainly keep that in mind. It is challenging when you're planning to develop comprehensively like this, that is going to be built over a 10 to 20-year period. Certainly a lot can change in that. We know lots is changing on the transportation side of things. For example, Uber and Lyft has really transformed how people move around in inner cities, in many cities, and we expect that will increasingly be the case in Ottawa. We don't know what's going to be happening with autonomous vehicles in the next 10 to 20 years. So a lot could change the parking demand. And certainly Claridge does not want to overbuild parking. A lot of it's going underground. We should point out, I think Nathan mentioned this, that some of the parking will actually be above ground in that two-story podium that the easternmost four towers are sitting on. And there will be flexibility in that space. We can't necessarily convert that space all to residential units, but there would be the opportunity, if we don't need parking, in as much parking in those spaces, they can be converted to storage space, maybe to extra amenity space. Who knows, maybe even to kind of workspaces that don't require a lot of daylight. I'm not sure, but absolutely, I think any developer does not want to build space that doesn't get used. So certainly, I could see phase by phase that the parking demand on this project could drop over time.
And for the sake of transparency, there is another comment along these lines that says, not enough parking for all units, especially if tenants have more than one car, and relying on Ottawa Transit to pick up the slack is a questionable notion. So a very complicated issue for sure. Just give me a second to queue up the next question. Does Claridge have a plan to address the adverse health impacts associated with living directly adjacent to the highway? Has your design team taken the mental/physical health of potential future inhabitants into account?
Yes, we have had a noise and vibration study conducted for the project, which outlines a range of measures that will need to be taken in the detailed design of this building. And Nathan, you could speak to this if you'd like to provide a bit more detail on that. So we certainly ensure that the living spaces of the units there are meeting the standards for acoustic comfort within those units. Now, regardless of whatever those standards are, I think it's recognized not everyone's going to want to live overlooking a freeway. So there is a kind of personal choice that is made at the end of the day, and presumably people that don't want to put up with any kind of noise from a freeway may not be attracted, at least to the south side of this development. But as Nathan's pointed out, the environment on within many of the units in these developments that are not facing the highway, I think will be not unlike living in just about any other apartment building in Ottawa. Anything to add, Nathan?
Just again to say that the manner in which the taller buildings have been oriented minimize the number of units that are directly facing the highway. The space between the buildings has been maximized to avoid kind of having resonance problems in between. So that sound and wind will be mitigated by baffles and other such devices between the buildings. We can treat small, controllably sized surfaces with triple glazing, with massive building materials, and simply limiting exposure. Providing balconies with solid facings so that sound it doesn't penetrate through to the apartments. There are a lot of means of mitigating sound and keeping it down to code requirements or superior to code requirements. Providing that we don't have so many units that it becomes financially difficult for us to do that. But part of the approach to the design of this was to actually minimize the number of units that would be directly facing, and then treat those units with architectural means, smaller windows, balconies, etc., to keep sound away from the inside of the units, and as well to present to the highway irregular forms so that sound will not be reflected directly. We can use certain amounts of absorption inside balconies, for instance, greenery to keep the sound from bouncing towards the south, which wouldn't be beneficial either. So there are a lot of means. We have a long way to go in it, but acoustic treatment was one of the very first priorities that we had to look at in dealing with this site.
Okay, thank you. Just checking in, it's 8:28. There's still quite a few questions, so as long as everyone's okay, we're going to stretch this out to 8:45, but then we will shut things down at 8:45, and any remaining questions, we'll sort that out via email. Okay, so I'm just trying to find something that hasn't been asked yet.
Fiona?
Yep.
I wanted to, Donna and Bruce have asked a question.
This development is very exciting, that one?
Yeah, but the rest of it is the more interesting part,
Yeah,
obviously.
Sure, I'll read that one.
We like
This
that part.
development,
Yeah.
This development is very exciting for the city and the neighborhood. My concern is traffic. Living on Broadview, we currently experience a heavy flow Sunday to Saturday with the SJCC and the school, as well as a bit of speeding. There's also quite a large flow of traffic during the heavy hours coming down to Hawaii, to the traffic lights at Broadview for people cutting through to get to Carling and to the Queensway. I see this daily. Is there an option to eventually close Doheny, I'm so sorry, I don't know how to pronounce this, at Boyd to calm the flow of traffic in the neighborhood?
That's a question city staff have started asking me about as well, because I think the cut through traffic over to streets like Maitland. What I'm wondering, Don and Bruce, is can you drop me a line so I can get in touch with you directly, so we can so I can get a better understanding of what those traffic patterns are. In my view, yes, we can do some significant changes in the neighborhood to change traffic patterns. It's something that I've spoken with Claridge about, and they understand that this is likely going to be a request that I come through with, is how to make sure that Broadview Rex Care don't bear all of a sudden a whole whack of cut through traffic. So I asked Fiona to read this one out loud, just because I did want to ask you to please get in touch with me, just so that we can have a more focused meeting on local traffic impacts on the Broadview Rex Care streets, because I think we've got some flexibility in terms of how we handle that.
Okay, thank you. There have been several references to noise and sound abatement, as well as references to neighborhood enhancement to the north. How will this development increase noise rebound to the south of the 417? We have just lost an on-ramp to the 417. How do you hope to direct traffic to major arteries? I live on La Perrier Avenue, so you can understand my concern.
There are a few things there. I think Nathan partially addressed the first comment in terms of mitigating noise bouncing off of the towers by including some materials that would kind of absorb sound, including some vegetative materials. Nathan, I'm not sure if you have anything more detailed to add to that.
Not much at this point. Again, the treatment of balconies, when we have balcony recesses inside the soffits can be absorbed with materials, but as well the fact that the buildings are irregular shaped, they're not all parallel walls facing the highway, should mitigate somewhat direct reflection of sounds and sort of spread it out or diffuse it as well as absorb it. Again, this is certainly issues that we'll be dealing with at a more detailed level as we move along. Like to ensure people listening that we recognize it as a priority for this development.
I'll just add too that it's not as though we're creating a solid wall of buildings here. The buildings are 20 to 24 meters wide generally, and the spacing between them is sort of 24 to 28 meters between. So there's that bounce off effect is going to not be maybe as great as what might be perceived looking at the images of this development. On the traffic question, where the traffic primarily here is going to be, and Brad can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong here, primarily I think coming to and from the site via Churchill and Clyde, so there's access on both roads. In fact, there's two accesses on Clyde, one to the internal street, the Promenade Street, and then a second entrance directly to underground parking a little bit further to the south. And I think, Brad, it's safe to say that much of the traffic coming to and from the site will be heading up to Carling to those intersections there, and then from there using Carling to get to wherever they need to go to, or continuing up Churchill if their destination is further north. Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, the majority of traffic is anticipated to travel towards Carling, or some traffic may elect to travel south on Clyde to Woodward to connect to Maitland to get to the highway, to travel west on the highway essentially, or south on Maitland. But those are the main directions on where they'll be going to, or to and from the site. Yeah.
Thanks, Brad. Did we catch everything in that question, Fiona?
How will this development increase noise rebound to the south of 417? And then have we just lost an on-ramp? Sorry, we've just lost an on-ramp to the 417. How do you hope to direct traffic to the major arteries?
Yeah, I think we got both parts of that.
Okay, so there are several questions that I've been saving, all asking what is the timeline for the 3 phases? And on a similar note, when is expected occupancy? And how long will the project take from start to finish?
Vincent, I have a feeling I know what your answer might be, but I'll let you, as the developer representative, maybe speak to this one.
Yeah, I mean, for phase 1, depending on approvals, obviously, we're looking at maybe 2 to 3 years for shovels in the ground, and maybe a year for occupancy, depending on how many cranes we put up and everything. But I guess the market will dictate on how quick we're going to move on the other phases. So, it could take 5 years, it could take 10 years, it could take 15 years. We're not really sure yet. If the market slows down, it might take longer. So For the first phase, I'd say 3 to 4 years, we'd see some occupancies maybe, but for the later phases, we don't know yet.
Okay, thank you. Steve, on that note, with the park, would the park have to wait for the final build out, or would that be something that gets done sooner rather than later?
Well, that's something that I would obviously discuss with Park. We would have to. I guess with the first phase, we could not have sufficient parkland dedication to justify the park, but that's something to be discussed with Parks and the developer. So
yeah, you might also need it for staging or something too, but I was just curious.
Yeah.
Our hope, I was going to say, Fiona, I mean, our hope is that we can work something out that maybe not the entirety of the park, but a certain significant amount of the park could be built in the first phase, recognizing that that amenity is going to be needed sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that was my thinking too, right? Like it's so many buildings, but even 1 or 2 would totally appreciate the park space. Okay. We know Councillor Leeper likes intensification in his ward, as is evident with Condo Alley on Wellington Street, Island Park to Churchill, and even more planned for Wellington Street and the Westgate project. And Novotel, ? On Carling, do we really need more?
I'll say yes, you do need more. You need it in the right places, and you need it at the right levels of intensification. But I think I can speak for all the planners at the city, and I hope for most of council actually, in saying that all of the city needs more intensification, and Carling Avenue is certainly a primary location for that. There's just a number of sites like this one and adjacent sites that are big, can accommodate higher density without having adverse impacts, significant adverse impacts on established neighborhoods, while supporting the investments in public transit. I think everyone agrees are needed. Bring more amenities. I think everyone's hearing more and more about the kind of 15-minute neighborhood idea. This does exist in places, in pockets of Westboro today. Could say they live in a 15-minute neighborhood. I think we want to see more of these developed across the city, and that really, you could say, is the vision for this area. It's just to have concentration of people that will support a whole variety of businesses, support public transit, so that, yes, there'll be cars on the site, but really they're not going to need their cars most of the time. So that really is the vision here, and I think it's really the vision the city has for many, many different parts of the city, certainly all along these major transit corridors, and particularly where these commercial pockets where change is appropriate.
I'm just going to say, I think a number of the projects that the resident is asking about were, they precede my time in office, and at least one of those is not actually in Kitchissippi Ward, but certainly I am a proponent of intensification. I think it has to be handled more smartly than what we have done. You'll have seen my votes against the buildings that were proposed on Scott Street that were generally because they were not in line with the plans that we've developed as a city for how we're going to develop, and more recently because they're not giving us the design and the affordable housing that we need. But all of council is strong on encouraging greater intensification in order to address the housing and the climate crisis that we have in the city. So by over the next 25 years, just over half, a little bit over half of our growth, 400,000 people, is going to be in the form of intensification in neighborhoods that have already been built. Continued suburban sprawl is the worst disaster we can have for affordable housing, and it's the worst disaster we can have for our climate. If we give people the opportunity to live in developments like this one, which again, I am more open to than I normally am of these big, tall developments, giving people the opportunity to live close to transit, an easy walk to the food basics. They're a 15-minute walk from Dovercourt. They're in Broadview School catchment frequent with, again, maybe a 15 or a 20-minute walk. Transit will be coming down Carlane Avenue. You know, giving people the opportunity to live here, and even if they have a car, leave it in the garage, which they're much less likely able to do in the suburbs, is how we address the climate crisis. Every time somebody drives a car, the average distance that somebody in Canada drives a car. So there is an average distance that the car is driven in Canada, and in order to absorb the greenhouse gases from the average Canadian car driving in 1 year, it takes 500 trees, right? 10 cars out in the suburbs in an urban sprawl who drive back and forth, you know, that requires 5,000 trees in order to absorb the greenhouse gases. We have to intensify if we're going to address this. We also have to have tall buildings like these. In Ottawa right now, the reason rental housing costs so much is because we have a 1.8% vacancy rate. No one has built rental housing for years. And with a 1.8% vacancy rate, which is half of what the vacancy rate needs to be in order to be healthy, rents are absolutely astronomical. So that in most of our ward, a one-bedroom apartment is costing you close to $2,000 a year in order to live in a ward like Kitchissippi. I think what is interesting about this development is being able to offer some significant new amount of rental stock that won't be luxury, right? And that will help to bring rental prices down as we add more and more of that inventory. And that's the only way we're going to be able to address truly the market affordability crisis. We have a lot of work to do at the city in order to do deeply affordable housing for people who will never be able to afford housing at market prices. But adding more housing is critical to addressing the rental crisis that we have. And as we add that housing, that rental housing, it needs to be in places like this where people have a viable option to live car-free, or at least certainly significantly reduce the amount of driving they do every year. And that is critical in order for us to achieve our climate change objectives. So yes, the resident is right. I'm a fan of intensification. I vote against a lot of it a lot of the time because I think it has to be thoughtful. But in this case, certainly I am supportive of the intensification of this location. I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we have time for one last question. Jeff or anyone else, I don't know if there's one that's standing out to you. Otherwise, I will just pick. What will happen to this new intensified neighborhood once the highway inevitably needs to be widened as the city continues to grow?
I think
they
we're
won't be
all
able to widen it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, the MTO is very actually careful in planning its highway corridors such as this. And one of the reasons for the 14-meter setback is to protect for some limited widening. Apparently, I don't think there's the expectation on the MTO's part or anyone's is that that this highway will be widened any further, but there is some protection for that if required. Yeah, I think that's all we have to say on that.
Can we just jump at the overall view, because there's another aspect to the question. In case there is any confusion, Tim, the 14 meters is not to a reserve for future widening. There's already an additional, is it 9 or 10 meters from the current edge of the embankment to the property line. So in fact, there's already a buffer there in the hopefully unlikely notion that the highway would ever need to be widened in this day and age. So that 14 meters is right now it's not left as a barrier for expansion. It's more of a security barrier, and there already is a buffer on the north side of the 417 for a future widening, should they decide to do it without actually affecting our 14-meter buffer.
Thank you, Nathan. Yeah, you are correct. Actually, the MTO says the 14 meters might be in case they ever need the road, but the reality is it's mainly for safety. So you're absolutely correct.
I would just say it costs them $100 million to do this most recent phase of widening. And I hope that the residents in the West End, who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of this, when they see that their commutes 5 or 6 years from now are not in fact any faster than what they are today, I hope that they will join those of us who are seeking to not allow the Queensway to be widened again. You know, you'd think we would have learned. Every time we widen the highway, it costs us tens and hundreds of millions of dollars, and somehow the commutes just keep getting worse. You know, we need to make sure that we're putting the investment of tax dollars into public transit as the only sustainable way to move people around in our city.
Okay, thank you. So there are some questions that we didn't have time to get to today. If you feel as though your question hasn't been answered, please shoot us an email and we'd be happy to get that question answered. As we've said throughout this process, the application hasn't even been submitted yet, so this is very early days of what's going to be a long process. So feel free to shoot us your question, and apologies if we didn't get to it. There is one question here. Fiona, can you please release all of the questions for the public to read? I could do that, but I won't have the answers attached to them. But I will capture the data, and if anyone is interested in that, you can shoot me an email and I'd be happy to pass that along. The reason we don't have the answers is because we've answered the questions orally here tonight. So to reiterate, this is being recorded and it will go on YouTube most likely by the end of the week. And again, if you missed anything, just shoot us an email. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Councillor Brockington and Councillor Leeper to kind of close us out tonight. So I'll start with you, Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Councillor Leeper, for hosting this event. This is on the border of not just River Ward and Kitchissippi Ward, but also College Ward. So we're at the border of 3 wards, and I'm very interested in the proposal. I thought the presentation, guys, was very good, very clear, and you put a lot of good detail and work into it. Thank you very much. There's a lot of interest in Carlington, which is the neighborhood immediately to the south, for a number of reasons, but also because we consider you part of the neighborhood. And so if this does get built, we want to welcome you and make sure it's a good fit. I'm not as hung up on the height as I am just function, how this functions well in the existing community, and with traffic impacts, public transportation, public realm issues, how to make this livable. So very interested in how you can get retail in there and get a good mix of tenants. Jeff's right, gave a good answer about public transit. 2022 is when the city's looking at opening the right-hand lanes on Carling for buses only. They're going to be putting in some bus infrastructure. It's not a true rapid bus corridor, but it's certainly the first phase of where we're headed. And when you do look at what's been approved at Westgate and Travelodge, the South Side and River Ward, and what the Civic Hospital is going to generate, the CDP we had on Maryville Road a couple years ago, you're going to see development continue on streets like Carling and Maryville. And so it's like Jeff says, it's got to be smart development. But gentlemen, I thought your aerial shot of the neighborhood was startling, how much concrete there is. Not your proposal, but just the whole sort of Ottawa West. And it's good to see in your proposal that green space and park, as much green as possible. But I came here tonight to listen, and very much look forward to working with Councillor Leeper and Councillor Shirelli in his office and the proponents on this development. So thank you for your time.
I will just say, thank you very much for the presentation. The affordable housing piece, and I know Claridge is tired of hearing this, but the affordable housing piece is critical to getting my support for this project. I think, I appreciate Claridge's willingness to go above and beyond in terms of advocating with me and with Riley to the city for the acceleration of great transit on Carling. This development won't be sustainable without it. And then my job over the next several months is going to be to hear your concerns. Make sure that the city planners are treating those seriously. In many cases, I'll be raising my own concerns and agreeing with concerns that are raised with me that become something that I try to convince the planner to reject the application unless it's changed. That doesn't always work. The planners are independent of council and me, but my job is to advocate with them to try to get this proposal into the best possible shape. For College Ward residents, we are in kind of weird times right now. There was a question earlier about representation. I am more than happy to hear your concerns. We will approach the College Ward staff and make sure that they're aware of this so that they can distribute this among their members. The councillor for College Ward is still the councillor for College Ward and can exercise his vote at council if he chooses. But certainly, if you need a little bit of help with the planning department, I'm certain that both Councillor Brockington and I are here to help, working with the councillors, staff, and College Ward. Steve, where do we go from here?
Well, the application will be submitted soon, or has just recently been submitted. So the I guess the details will be should be circulated in about 2 weeks, I would say, from now. So as usual, there's going to be a 28-day circulation period where people are invited to submit written comments. So for now, those are the first steps. So if need be, there can be further discussion in the process. You'll decide if another information session is required, but as far as it is right now, the application just came in, so you should see something circulated in about 2 weeks, 3 weeks for the most.
And then what do you do with the application and the feedback that comes in?
Well, what do I do? So it helps inform staff. Staff has to do its own analysis. The different departments that are circulated, they do their own analysis. They submit comments. So I have to gather everything and share them with the proponent, with the developer, to discuss changes that staff would see as appropriate to address staff concerns and legitimate public concerns.
And then staff will make a recommendation to the Planning Committee of Council as to whether or not they should approve the development, and then Planning Committee will vote on that. And then the Planning Committee vote will constitute a recommendation that goes to City Council. And where City Council decisions are challenged either by residents or the developer, that can then be brought up to the local Planning Appeal Tribunal. But we are a long way away from that. Do you have a target date in mind as to when this might be voted on by Planning Committee? Is it 8 months, a year from now?
It all depends on the outcome of the comments that we've received. So once the circulation period is completed, and once the comments are shared with the developer, I guess it depends on how the discussion will unfold, and if we end up with a project within a few months after the circulation period, I guess the report could be presented to Planning Committee this spring. Yeah.
Sounds about right. Spring. I'll count on summer. Vincent, do you have any thoughts on the timing? When are you targeting?
Like Steve said, I mean, if significant issues arise from staff or from the public, then it'll delay us. But the statutory timeline would put us around spring, summertime. Yep. And that's what we're thinking as well. So.
And those who will be commenting, anybody who comments during the public the circulation period, you can ask to be informed of staff recommendations. So the report that staff will be presenting to planning committee would be distributed to whoever asked to be informed of the recommendation 10 days ahead of the planning committee.
Fantastic. Thank you very much to the residents from both Carlington and Kitchissippi who joined us this evening. I assume some College Ward residents as well, and possibly some Bay Ward. It is a really significant development. Please feel free to email me or email Riley or email Teresa or email the Councillor for College Ward. If there is, my last word is that I will be putting updates in my own weekly newsletter for those of you who subscribe to that, and I'm sure the other councillors, as they have updates, will do the same. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate it. Thank you, Steve, for being here. Thanks to the development team. Thank you very much, Fiona, as always, for your expert and professional moderation.
No problem.
Have a good
Thank
evening,
you.
everyone.
Yes. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Fiona, good job.
Thanks.